Hey everyone, I'm your host RK, here to blow your minds with some facts about furries. This video is meant for everyone and not just the furry community, so firstly, what is a furry? According to the Independent Anthropomorphics Research Project, funded by the Government of Canada, furries are, quote, people who like cartoon animals, have fursonas, have interest in anthropomorphic animals, or do furry things. People who self-identify as furry. The furry fandom is an art-centered participatory fandom that includes, but is certainly not limited to, traditional sci-fi and fantasy fiction themes with an anthropomorphic focus that contains many subcultures. I also go into more definition in my introduction video, and I have a furry fandom playlist that outlines in detail the history and inner workings of the fandom as a whole. But we're here to talk about misconceptions, so let's start. Misconception number 1, furries think they are animals. Most furries don't identify with animals, but they create online alternate personae called fursonas to represent themselves, like an avatar. That doesn't mean they feel like they are that animal. There is a group of people called Therians who identify with animals on a spiritual level and have a heavy crossover with the furry fandom. I know some Therians are going to post in the comments how this is an inaccurate description, so subscribe and we'll make an episode for you. Misconception number 2, furries are an American thing. Oh, America, always thinking you're the center of the universe. Furries come from all over the world. First, there was an independent comic publishing community started in the early 80s, and the first conventions took place in the US in 1988, but online communities independently spawned all over the world. The first furry novel was Australian, the first rave was German, and the first outdoor camping convention was Canadian. This past year also saw the first convention spring up in Taiwan and South Africa. The US has a large amount of traffic for the fandom and boasts the most attended conventions in the world. Even the viewer statistics for my channel show 60% US audience. Misconception number 3, furries are a wildly different and unique fandom. The furry fandom is unique in that its creators create almost all of our own media, and it thrives on user-generated content. The fandom itself is similar to anime, comic book, and sci-fi fandoms, having regular conventions, dozens of fan sites, and a powerful online presence. Another comparable fandom might be YouTube, since it's also mostly user-generated content. Misconception number 4, all furries have fursuits. False. According to the IARP, only about 10% of furries will ever own a fursuit, full body or partial. A fursuit being an anthropomorphic animal costume. At furry conventions, fursuiters are more likely to attend and show off the goods, so about 20% of convention attendees are fursuiting. This misconception comes from the fact that they're so darned photogenic. Most press about the fandom focuses on these colorful ambassadors, leading to the thinking that all furries are that colorful. Misconception number 5, all furries are artists. This was a misconception started in the 90s when a cliquey group of artists tried to decree that to be furry, you had to be an artist and draw. Furries are very creative and their endeavors don't stop at visual art. There are furry musicians, writers, dancers, fursuit makers, and obviously, furry YouTubers. Furry is a participatory fandom with no authority on furry. You can ask J.K. Rowling what she meant with Harry Potter or George Lucas with Star Wars, but there's no central furry source. Each individual makes it their own. Not all furries are artists or creators, but furries are incredibly creative, which brings me to misconception number 6. You need a fursona to be a furry. You don't need a fursona to be a furry. You only need to call yourself a furry. It's just that simple. A fursona is a representation of someone or their original character. This representation is used anywhere from online chat groups, roleplay games, to social gatherings, and fursuit design. Most furries have fursonas though. This is partly because of social expectation amongst furries. Some furries use their fursonas to hide their identity and to separate their hobby from their life. This anonymous use allows people to be more comfortable posting more risque content and to avoid outsider judgment from people in their lives. In creating a fursona, furries are contributing back into the fandom that's supported by fan-made content. Misconception number 7, bronies are furries. Some furries are fans of My Little Pony, and some fans of My Little Pony are furries, but that doesn't exclusively mean that all bronies are furries. Just ask, do they self-identify as furries? If no, then they're not. Misconception number 8, furries work in IT. Now, this is semi-true. The top 3 fields of work for furries are IT, the hard sciences, and the arts. I can't count how many actual scientists I've met at conventions. It's a very nerdy hobby, and as I've mentioned, the fields of work fans pursue in their professional lives also tend to be nerdy. The fandom started to take hold in the early 90s, in part because of the early adaptation of computers within the community. Those type of people tended to be in computer sciences and moved on to work in the tech industry. Misconception number 9. Furries are an exclusive group. This couldn't be further from the truth. Furries are an incredibly welcoming group of people. It's big enough that there are tight circles of friends and cliques, but as a whole, the fandom is welcoming to all people of any shape, size, color, or animal species. Except birds, who are ruining the fandom. As I mentioned, some folk want to keep this part of their lives private, which may be why some people believe it's exclusive. Misconception number 10. All furries are single, sexless men. This is more related to the nerdy element of the fandom, that nerds are usually depicted as white, overweight, bearded men who live in their parents' basements and spend all day talking only to each other and getting into inconsequential arguments on the internet about anime fan theories. Surveys show that furries don't get any more or less sex than the general population. The same surveys do show that an overwhelming majority of furries are male, at around 70 to 80% depending on the study. Misconception number 11. All furries are gay or effeminate men. Not all furries are gay, but there is a really large and more visible LGBT population within furry. Gays and lesbians account for between 22 and 33%, bisexuals and people who fall elsewhere on the spectrum account for about another third of the fandom, and heterosexuals account for that final third. Another interesting statistic is that there are twice as many people within the fandom that identify as transgendered than occur in the general population. So if 1% of the general population identify as trans, then about 2% of furries do. Furry being so welcoming, it was one of the first safe spaces on the internet for people to be out and open about who they were, even if it was behind a persona. Misconception number 12. Furries are mentally ill. Furries are not mentally ill. There is no evidence to say that they are. Actually, the relation of the persona as an identity builder plus a community of welcoming friends that the fandom offers, furries are actually more psychologically healthy in the long term. A source is down in the description. Socializing is incredibly healthy, and the one thing the furry fandom does is create a community of support. Furries tend to have lower rates of anxiety. Asperger's syndrome is more common in the furry fandom at about 3%. There has also been a study that people who express their kinks in a healthy way also have a higher quality of mental health. The community helps to build self-esteem in fandom members, and the persona helps to secure one's identity to themselves and to the outside world. Misconception number 13. The furry fandom is all about porn and is a fetish. The furry fandom is about celebrating and being fans of anthropomorphic animals. Many of these fans are adults who like to express that in the form of erotic materials. An informal collection of data by a Reddit user deemed that only about 20% of all furry content across several popular websites was labeled as mature or adult, and does track a lot of the traffic. That's still a high amount, but it shows that regular content is still more popular to create. This also doesn't factor in other content like video games and websites and other media that's not posted on these popular sites, so the percentage of furry porn is probably even less than that overall. Our good friends at the IARP looked into this and estimated that 96.6% of males in the fandom consume furry porn and 78.3% of females. About 17% of furry males and 2% of furry women view exclusively furry porn. The fetish and porn elements are simply an overlapping activity. The remaining furs see it only as a fun, nerdy, escapist, and entertaining social group. It's worth pointing out that according to Forbes and the BBC, between 2009 and 2013, 13% of all online searches were for porn, and about 4% of all websites were for adult sites. Personally, I find there is about as much adult or erotic themes in furry as there are found in everyday life. It's what some people are in the fandom for, but it does not speak for all furries. While many discover the fandom through erotic works, the longer people are involved in the fandom, the less erotic materials they consume. Furry is an incredibly sex-positive community where people are very open and sometimes a little too honest about themselves. A big problem is that all of the art made by furries, from Disney to Dirty Works, are all posted in the feed of the most popular websites. The thing that will stick out most in your head will be the weirdest thing you see. If you don't want to see that kind of content, some sites offer a Safe for Work button to block that kind of material. The furry creators make money from this. Their works are non-exploitative, meaning they hurt no one. They are colorful, unique, and it makes the people buying it feel good about themselves. Misconception number 14. Furries have sexual attraction to fursuits and stuffed animals, also known as plushophilia. Firstly, it's commonly stated that fursuits are incredibly expensive, and it would be a waste of those resources to something as messy and as destructive as sex, let alone sex with many people at once. That being said, people outside the furry fandom also spend thousands of dollars on their sex lives. The IARP study that we've been talking about endlessly also showed that a very small minority of furries would consider themselves as having sexual attraction to fursuits or stuffed animals, only about 10%. There has not been a study to compare this to the general population. It's present, but still a small minority. Misconception number 15. Furries like animals, as in bestiality or zoophilia. The IARP study confirmed that the general population outside the fandom had around 15% attraction to animals. Within the furry fandom, it ranged between 2 and 16%, a tiny, tiny amount more than the regular population, but not enough to be statistically significant. Only 2 left, I swear. Misconception number 16. Furries have orgies in state parks and hotels. The most common route to this misconception is a CSI episode from 2003 entitled Fur and Loathing, which depicts a furry convention as being a large orgy of fursuiters. This same misconception also comes up from popular comedy shows like 30 Rock, The Office, Orange is the New Black, and Kimmy Schmidt.
Can I tell you something? I'm a plushie.
Is that a fraternity?
Kind of. It means I belong to a group of like-minded people who dress up in mascot costumes.
Oh, okay.
And have orgies in hotel rooms and state parks.
There it is.
There was even a radio host who spread rumors about a human-sized cat box. Conventions are commonly held at hotels and large outdoor venues, but as mentioned earlier, furries don't have any more sex than the regular population. Adults attending these events will likely go do adult things in the privacy of their hotel room, and what those things are none of our business. These days, it's often used as clickbait to shock and disgust potential viewers so that you can look at their advertising. The CSI episode is commonly people's only exposure to the furry fandom from a mainstream media. It gives the impression that it's all about having sex in animal costumes, which has damaged the furry fandom's reputation for over a decade, creating a very specific and demeaning stereotype of the fandom at large. And finally, misconception number 17, furries are worthy of ridicule and bullying. Well, what did furries ever do to you? It's easy for people outside the fandom to joke about it, but let's face it, a lot of it is very silly and ridiculous. But furries know that too. Furries are viciously aware of the stereotypes and some of the more unusual aspects of the fandom, so they do poke fun at themselves. Bullying has always been a problem for furries. Even before joining up with the fandom, an overwhelming amount of furries have reported experiencing bullying in their youth. A lot of the hate furries receive comes from the most extreme examples of furry art and erotica being shared as gross-out humor. Even the less extreme artwork is upsetting to homophobes and people with sex-negative attitudes. They are at best going to see the animal aspect and associate it with zoophilia, as mentioned before, or the cartoony aspect and associate it with plushophilia. As we've just learned, this is almost entirely untrue. These misconceptions are slowly coming apart with more media exposure and a greater understanding. As the community grows, it becomes more visible. I've read so many articles of journalists attending furry conventions for the first time, and the stereotype they are now starting to form, which is completely true, is that furries are incredibly friendly party animals. I have been your host, RK, and I would like to thank our contributors this week, Patch O'Fur of Dogpatch.press, Dronon Hysterical, and Slipwolf. I hope this episode has been enlightening to you, and I hope that you share it with people who hold some of these misconceptions. Don't forget to subscribe and tell us what you think down in the comments, and thanks for watching.